Okay, welcome to another Orbiter 2010 video. And in this video, I just want to show something that we can do to improve our efficiency when going to the moon. Now, in order to save a little bit of time, I'm going to skip to a different scenario here in just a moment so I can bypass the actual ride to orbit. I've got tons of videos where I take off from the ground and get into orbit, and that takes an additional 11 or 12 minutes, so I'm going to skip the ride to orbit this time. In order to get to the moon, per the directions that are outlined in the DG to the moon tutorial, which I think is probably what a lot of people tend to follow, then you can see here, if you look at our MFDs, we are at that point where it's basically time to take off and head off to orbit. We would take off at the runway heading, turn to 90 degrees, and then get to orbit. And we know that it's the right time to go because our relative inclination is currently as low as it's going to get on this particular date. And you can see that our rate is negative 0.000. So if we keep waiting, it's going to go to positive, and then the rate, or rather the relative inclination, is going to start to increase. So this is the right time to go. Normally what you do, if you're following those DG to the moon instructions in that tutorials scenario folder, once you got to orbit, you would circularize your orbit, and then you would do a plane alignment burn in order to bring this relative inclination down to 0. So what I want to show in this video is just something that we can do that's very simple, and the emphasis there is on simplicity. But I want to show something that we can do so that we can bypass this plane alignment burn and still get to the moon. And the reason we want to do that is because this is an expensive way to bring down the relative inclination. When you get to the descending node or the ascending node and you do that burn, it uses a lot of delta V. So that's the setup to this video. So now I need to exit out and load a different scenario. So just bear with me one moment. And in this scenario that loads up here in a moment, we will already be in orbit.
All systems
here we are.
nominal.
And let me go back to this view just so we have larger MFDs to look at. Just make a couple of quick changes here. Okay, so we're in orbit. And if you look here at orbit MFD, you can see that our orbit is circular. The eccentricity is 0.00, and we have a good orbital altitude of about 240 kilometers. We are 5.57 degrees off plane from the moon. So again, normally what we would tend to do at this point would be to fast forward time until we get over here close to the ascending node. Then we would go to the anti-normal position, and we would do a burn to bring this down to 0 or very close to it. Now, one question I have is how much delta V is required to bring this number down to 0. And the easiest way to figure that out without using some sort of external software or spreadsheet is to use burn time calculator. And the way we have to figure this out is it's kind of an indirect method. According to Align Plane MFD, we need a burn that's going to use the full power of the main engines for 37.72 seconds. That's what this is telling us. If we get over here and we do an anti-normal burn, we're going to have to, press plus on the numeric keypad and use the full power of the main engines for 37, close to 38 seconds. And when we do that, it should bring the relative inclination down to just about 0. So let's figure out how much delta V that's going to cost, because a line plane doesn't tell us. So I'm going to press MD a couple of times to get this over to manual start. Now, there's no way for me to put in this number, 5.57. I can't do that in burn time calculator, but what I can do is press DV, and I just want to say, how much will 200 delta V take in terms of time? So in order to burn 200 meters per second, how much time will that take? And according to burn time calculator, it's 9.957, so just about 10 seconds. So that's not enough. We need to burn for 37.72 seconds. So let's try to triple this number. So instead of 200, let's go out to 600. And we're getting much closer. So a 600 meter per second amount of delta V would require a burn time of about 30 seconds. So we're not quite there yet, but we're getting close. So let's try 750. Now we're getting really close. So we know now the approximate cost of doing this 37.72 second burn is approximately 750. It's not quite, it might even be more like 760. Yeah, that's pretty much spot on right there. So you can see how I was able to figure that out. So a 37.72 second burn, which is really close to this number, would cost us approximately 760 worth of delta V. That's just to bring the relative inclination down to 0. That's not to get out to the moon. That's just to bring the relative inclination down to 0. So let's not do that. Let's do something else. Let me close out. Actually, I'll go ahead and leave this up for now. Let's bring up TransX. And we're not going to do an aligned plane burn at all. So let's just get rid of this MFD. We don't need it. Bring up TransX here and TransX here. And let's set up a plan for going out to the moon using a concept called off-plane transfer. And I want to emphasize again that this is not the very best way to do this. This isn't ideal, this isn't perfect efficiency, but it's simple. This is something that anybody should be able to add to their flight path, for their journey, for their planning, for going out to the moon without getting, crazy into complexity. So everybody should be able to duplicate this. So let's set up our normal plan for going to the moon, and hopefully you're familiar with TransX. If not, I've got a ton of other videos that show how to do this. So we select the moon, then we come over to maneuver, turn maneuver mode on, go through the variables, and we need to put in the normal amount, which is about 3.1 something, and something close to that. Now we need to come over to the date, and we need to move it forward a little bit because this is where the moon's at right now, and we're going to rendezvous with the moon somewhere over, more like out here. And on this side, what we can do, of course, is come forward and view the encounter to help us dial this in as close as we can get it. And I think we've got a little more delta V than we need here, so let me back this up to the prograde. And let's just take this back a little bit. That's looking pretty good. And finally back over to the date real quick. And what I'm doing here is I'm just laying this green line straight over top of the moon, trying to get it crossing basically dead center. Now you can see that it says our minimum altitude is 24.39. So what is that? 24,000 kilometers. So we're pretty high up. In other words, we would be going out to the moon, but our plane is tilted because we didn't do the plane alignment burn. So our plane is tilted so much that we would actually be passing above the moon by a significant margin. But that's okay because we're going to fix that as part of our mid-course correction. And it works out that we can do the mid-course correction at a much lower delta V cost than it was going to cost us to do that plane alignment burn. So let's just see how much we can save. This is good enough for this purpose. I don't need to sit here and try to refine this any further. So let's go over to view target, and we're only about 900 seconds away from the burn. So let me warp time ahead. I'm using a slightly customized version of TransX, by the way. This was made by the same guy that did the HAL base. His name's Dimitri. Awesome guy.
Warning, coolant temperature.
And 1 second, I forgot that since I'm in the XR2,
System reset.
you have to have the radiator open. If I don't have this view up, I forget sometimes that I'm in the XR2, and I'm assuming I'm in the standard Delta glider, and I just forget things like this. So let me quickly open the radiator. Okay, there we go. Turn the APU back off, and now that'll be fine. And let's set that over there. Go ahead and warp time ahead, get close to the time to begin this burn. Okay, back to real time. Go to prograde just to get things generally straightened out. And prograde off.
Rotation.
Make sure we get rotation on and get the green X lined up. And that's pretty good right there. Now we just wait. And burning. Go ahead and warp time ahead to get through this burn quickly. And go back to real time for a moment and work on straightening out that X a little bit. Yeah, it looks better. And warp time ahead again just for a moment. And back way off the main engines.
Retro doors are closed. Translation.
And we'll get the rest of this with some translation. I'm going to say that's good enough, so we're going to come over to view maneuver and turn maneuver mode off. Now, let's just go ahead,
Rotation.
kill rotate, and let's warp out to the point where we can set up our mid-course correction. Now again, just keep in mind that at the our current trajectory to head out to the moon has us, if we want to think about the moon, Earth being in a straight line, something like that, we're kind of doing this. We're heading up above the moon. So we have to do a correction to make sure that we don't fly straight over top the moon. So let's warp time out to the normal time when Earth's gravitational influence drops to about 0.5.
Translation.
Kill rotate. Warp 1,000, 10,000, just to get out there quickly. And we're getting pretty close. Back to 1,000. And there's 0.49, and there it just turned red. So let's come out of time warp, back to real time. And now let's set up our mid-course correction to make sure that we can actually get to the moon. Because currently we're missing the moon by thousands of kilometers. So we're going to come over here to maneuver mode and turn maneuver mode on. And then we're going to go through the variables. And I always like to kind of start with the date and just bump it forward by 30, 40, something like that, just to give me a few minutes to set this up. That's good enough. And I believe here what we obviously have to do for starters is a plane change. And you can see our minimum altitude coming way down now. And we're only at 105 delta V so far. $156, 174, and I'm going to say somewhere around here is pretty good because we still have some amount of inaccuracy, so we don't necessarily want to bring the minimum altitude all the way down to 20 kilometers quite at this point. Can bring it down to maybe 200 would be good. Yeah, something like that. Okay, so this is going to cost us 186 in order to do this mid-course correction. So this is in lieu of the plane change that we were going to do at Earth. And remember, that was going to cost us 760 delta V. So by not doing that, we're saving, what is that, 600 worth of delta V. Now, of course, in a craft like the XR2, especially if you're just using default settings, it's not really that big of a deal. But if you start doing missions where budgeting your delta V becomes important, then this amount of savings is huge. It's absolutely huge. So let's just go ahead and execute this burn. We're not going to worry about inclination or off-plane distance to the base.
Translation. Rotation.
Let's just see which way we need to get rotated. A little sloppy, overshot that by a lot. And we will warp time ahead to get closer to the time to finish this burn. Okay, getting really close. And burning. Okay,
translation,
and translate the difference. And there we have it. Now view over to maneuver, turn maneuver mode off, and we can kind of see how things went along. We're pretty much done with that view. We can go ahead and get rid of that. So now let's just go ahead and warp time ahead to get out closer to the moon, and then we'll consider this video finished. We're not going to worry about, actually getting over and landing or anything like that. Just wanted to show this cool and simple thing that you can do to save a bunch of delta V. Okay, we are now within the moon's SOI. The orbit updated, so we can now hit prograde. And we can see the moon there in front of us. And we can auto-reference the moon. Now we can see that our periapsis is going to be about 160. And of course, if I were actually going to plan on doing a landing here, I would want to do a little bit of an inward burn to bring that down a little bit. But we're not going to worry about that. And that's good enough.
rotation,
Go ahead and rotate, get a look at our final destination. And there you have it. So that's really all I wanted to show in this video. Again, it's not the most ideal, the most absolutely efficient thing you can do, but it is a simple step that you can add to your Earth to Moon flights that will help you become a little bit more efficient in doing these flights. And I think it's just something that's definitely worth checking out, and it starts to get the gears turning a little bit for things that you can do in the future to ever continually increase your efficiency. Because in spaceflight, getting from point A to point B with the minimum amount of delta V is pretty much always the goal in terms of realistic spaceflight. If you like this video, go ahead and leave a comment down below, and I will see you next time. Okay, welcome to another Orbiter 2010 video. And in this video, I just want to show something that we can do to improve our efficiency when going to the moon. Now, in order to save a little bit of time, I'm going to skip to a different scenario here in just a moment so I can bypass the actual ride to orbit. I've got tons of videos where I take off from the ground and get into orbit, and that takes an additional 11 or 12 minutes, so I'm going to skip the ride to orbit this time. In order to get to the moon, per the directions that are outlined in the DG to the Moon tutorial, which I think is probably what a lot of people tend to follow, then you can see here, if you look at our MFDs, we are at that point where it's basically time to take off and head off to orbit. We would take off at the runway heading, turn to 90 degrees, so that we can bypass this plane alignment burn and still get to the moon. And the reason we want to do that is because this is an expensive way to bring down the relative inclination. When you get to the descending node or the ascending node and you do that burn, it uses a lot of delta V. So that's the setup to this video. So now I need to exit out and load a different scenario. So just bear with me one moment. And then get to orbit. And we know that it's the right time to go because our relative inclination is currently as low as it's going to get on this particular date. And you can see that our rate is negative 0.000. So if we keep waiting, it's going to go to positive, and then the rate, or rather the relative inclination, is going to start to increase. So this is the right time to go. Normally what you do if you're following those DG to the moon instructions in that tutorials scenario folder, once you got to orbit, you would circularize your orbit, and then you would do a plane alignment burn in order to bring this relative inclination down to 0. So what I want to show in this video is just something that we can do that's very simple, and the emphasis there is on simplicity. But I want to show something that we can